So, what makes it harder for younger generations to connect to the local church? It's a complicated question. There's a lot of factors, but a couple of slices. One is basically just sociological, right? We are a very mobile generation. We stay in school longer. We tend to get married later. We tend to have kids if we have them later than that. And so those are some factors, as well as the fact that like Charles Taylor talks about us living in a secular age. So belief in God is no longer the default. It's an option among others. That goes doubly and triply for going to church, right? You don't have to go to church to be a good person anymore or be spiritual. That might actually be a drag in some ways. And so a lot of the sociological kind of cultural pressures that got our parents and even our older siblings into church and plugged in and into the regular rhythms, they're just not there for us. They're either not there or they're weaker. So that's one level. The other level is more kind of moral orientation. We want community. We want intimacy. We want some of the things that come with community, but we're scared. We're scared of losing our freedom. We're scared of losing our autonomy. We're scared of being hurt. We're consumers who have been raised by consumers to be consumers, and so we tend to weigh our options a lot. We'll check out new jobs within a few months of being at a job. We'll check out new apartments within a few months of being at the apartment we're at. We will, however the app works, swipe left or right or whatever on dating relationships, and if a church isn't working within a couple of weeks or so, we'll just kind of ghost on it. And that's partially because of not wanting to settle, not wanting to miss out on another experience that possibly could be better. But some of it's also just out of fear. We have been burned. Like a lot of us are the children of divorce, or we are friends of people who are the children of divorce. So we've seen social institutions fail. We've seen political institutions fail. And so there's this fear of getting burned. There's this fear of breakdown. And so those losses kind of drive some of our inability to plug in, at least on our end. And the irony, of course, and this is the challenge, is getting people to see that, in fact, the church is where you find the answers to those fears, right? The church is where you find true freedom. It's not the freedom of unconstrained choice, but it's the freedom of finding yourself in others and with others through the ties that bind. It's not the freedom of dating a different guy or a different girl for the next 50 nights in a row. It's the freedom of dating the same one 50 nights in a row and then making promises to that person and getting to know them for the next 50 years. And that intimacy and that knowledge of being yourself with them and then receiving them as themselves. Or it's the freedom that comes with sticking at a job for 10, 20 years and getting really great at that. The freedom of being a master of a trade, not just a jack of a million trades. And that's the kind of freedom you start to get in the church, where you show up every week and you get to know people's names and they get to know yours, and you get to have inside jokes and long time prayers, and you see people walk through tragedy and pain and joy in life, and they share in yours, and you start to grow together in intimacy. You start to grow together in the freedom of safety, of knowing that you will not be alone when things happen, and that you get to be there for others and they get to be there for you. And that's the freedom of community. That's where life actually happens. We're scared of missing out, but if you never actually commit to one place, you will guaranteed miss out on the things that are happening in the local places where life happens. The danger, of course, is hurt, it's rejection, it's pain. That is a risk, but that's the risk of all love. That's the risk of all communities. And your options are basically the risk of community or kind of superficiality and loneliness. So it's either community or loneliness. And the fantastic thing about the church is the only community that has God's promises attached to it. It's the only community that God took a sovereign risk to create himself. It's the community that God chose a particular time and a particular place to become a man, to live, to die, to rise again, to purchase with his own blood to create a new community, and then sent his own Spirit to indwell, to knit together people in the bonds of peace and the bonds of love who normally wouldn't come together. And so it's the only community where the risk you take is outmatched by the risk that God took and sovereignly ensured would stand against the gates of hell, despite the frailties, despite all the problems that you will run into. This is the community with God's promises and God's purposes attached to it. And so if there's one place to find community, if there's one place to find freedom, if there's one place to risk those bonds of love, it's in the local church. And that's the invitation. And I think that's the invitation that churches need to be actively preaching and sharing, is preaching the good news that the gospel creates a church, and that this is where these truths, and this is where all this is embodied, and this is where life and freedom are found.